Well, good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to return to the podium this morning to introduce our opening plenary speaker, Bree Jones. Bree Jones is the visionary founder of Parity, which is an equitable development company based in West Baltimore. Parity sparks upfront demand for affordable home ownership opportunities in neighborhoods that are experiencing hyper-vacancy. Parity creates pathways for existing residents, families, friends, and other social collectives to purchase formerly abandoned homes alongside each other, thereby fostering a means to achieve community building and wealth building. Ms. Jones believes that we can revitalize historically redlined neighborhoods while ensuring that longtime residents can actively participate in and benefit from investment efforts. Prior to launching Parity, Ms. Jones enjoyed a successful career in finance, alternative investments, and venture capital creation. So please join me in welcoming Bree Jones.
Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to start by saying thank you so much to Michelle and the entire Movement is Life team for this really amazing opportunity. I think this is my first time presenting to a room full of doctors and physicians, so thank you all for being my first. So my name is Bree Jones. I'm the founder of Parity. So imagine a city where there are beautiful assets, it's historic, culturally rich, beautiful parks and green spaces, amenities, beautiful skylines, commercial assets, and some of the most prestigious and world-renowned universities and medical centers, not just in the region, but really across the globe. This would be, for all intents and purposes, an amazing place to live. But simultaneously, in that same city, there are tens of thousands of vacant buildings, dilapidation, distress, despair, social determinants of health disparities, drastically different life expectancies. What's going on here? How did this happen, and why is there a tale of two cities? So those images are all from Baltimore, which was once a thriving city, particularly for Black residents, Black businesses, Black churches, Black culture. This is the Royal Theater, which was one of the only theaters in the region to serve Black patrons. But in the early 1900s, so 1934, this is a map of redlined Baltimore, which was a federally mandated practice that required banks and insurance agencies to essentially look at the racial composition of neighborhoods and basically determine, okay, well, this neighborhood is predominantly white, so we're gonna say that this is a desirable community where we'll put very low income mortgages to prompt wealth building. Simultaneously, for neighborhoods that are predominantly Black, we're gonna mark those as undesirable. And in many cases, banks literally took a red marker and outlined those neighborhoods, hence the term redlining. But it set off a decades-long and really centuries-long process of disinvestment in Black communities where no flow of capital would go into those areas. So before coming here, I was altering my slides because I'm like, okay, I'm in a room full of doctors. They're gonna love to see like charts and graphs. So this is my first attempt at a graphical overlay. But for folks who are familiar with Baltimore, there's a term that Dr. Lawrence Brown has coined called the white L and the black butterfly, really representing, so the white L is the center of Baltimore that has historically been white and affluent. The black butterfly are like the wings of the butterfly that's East and West Baltimore, which are predominantly Black. And if you overlay this map with any modern day map of the social determinants of health in Baltimore, you'll see that the black butterfly persists. So this is the legacy of racist policy. So this is, you see Baltimore is highly segregated, massive income disparities, massive unemployment disparities, but there's also massive health disparities. So lead poisoning, the black butterfly has disproportionate rates of lead poisoning, disproportionate rates of asthma, premature deaths. And so not only in Baltimore, but really nationwide, this has resulted in a racial wealth disparity. So the homeownership disparity, there's about a 30% difference between white households that own their homes compared to black households that own their homes. And considering that 2/3 of the average American's wealth is tied up in their house, it's no surprise then that there's a 10x gap between median household wealth for white families and median household wealth for black families. And even when we factor for education, this is a room full of people who probably have multiple degrees and PhDs. White high school dropouts actually have more wealth than black college graduates. So just going to school and getting your education doesn't actually solve the wealth gap. In fact, I know an individual who is a doctor, a black doctor, and he can't afford to purchase a home because his student loans are so high. And so we really, a black doctor, so we really have to look at how race intersects with wealth building. And if we stay on this trajectory, by 2053, so that's about 30 years, the median household wealth for black families will go down to $0. So this is a truly, dire matter. So for Baltimore in particular, decades of redlining and segregation and block busting and predatory lending and urban renewal where they demolished whole black communities to make way for highways. These are all of the intentional systems and practices that have created the Baltimore that we know today. And so we've kind of created this negative downward spiral where we had this disinvestment caused by racist policy that led to depopulation and neighborhood deterioration, which led to banks saying, well, look, of course, this is, of course we wouldn't invest capital here because look at how distressed these neighborhoods are, which leads to further depopulation and neighborhood deterioration. And it becomes a never-ending downward spiral, which for Baltimore City, there are 15,000 vacant buildings and 23,000 vacant lots. So a little bit about me and my story. Sometimes I ask people, well, where do you think this picture was taken? And they'll say, oh, this looks like Baltimore. But actually, this is the Bronx, New York in the 70s. This is, okay, got some Bronxers in the house, hey. Okay, so that's where I was born and raised. That's where my parents grew up, where they met. And this is what the city was like for them. In many ways, people talked about New York then, how they talk about Baltimore now. It's a place to be avoided. Don't go to New York. I wouldn't be caught dead in New York. This picture is Harlem 125th and Lenox, which is the heart of Harlem. And as you can see, again, it looks like any corner in Baltimore where there's boarded up buildings, barricades. But if you go to 125th and Lenox today, this is what the building looks like now. There's a Whole Foods, there's a Starbucks. And so on the one hand, of course, we want revitalization. It's a good thing. We do want food, we do want resources, but the question is, who does this benefit? Because if you go to Harlem today, a lot of the black folks that had to live through those decades of disinvestment are no longer part of the fabric of these communities, and instead we are experiencing gentrification across New York. We're experiencing gentrification right here in Washington, D.C. And so we see historically these patterns of disinvestment in black communities, followed by massive investment, gentrification, and displacement of people, which, make no mistake, displacement of people is violent and it is counter to healthy outcomes. And so my story kind of begins in Mount Vernon, New York, which for folks who know is right north of the Bronx. And I could see the gentrification happening. I purchased one of the last vacant buildings in my community. And, oops, okay. I don't know, maybe can I go back one? Can the AV team play this video? You might just need to click, there you go, yeah. So purchased this building, used all of my own capital, and rolled up my sleeves and picked up a couple of tools and actually did part of the renovation work, because I knew that, you can clap for that, we'll take a clap, thank you. Thank you. I could see the writing on the wall that gentrification was going to continue to have these patterns of disinvestment for people who look like me, and I wanted to try to learn what I could do about it. And so I'm really proud to say that I was able to complete that property, and we have 3 perpetually affordable rental units for people in the community. So the same 3 families have been living in this home for the last 6 years, paying well below market rate rents. So I was like, okay, this was really hard. Do I want to do this again? And you know what, I had to talk to myself, and I was like, you know what, I think I can do this. I wanted to continue to do it in New York, but just the next year after I bought this property, I bought this for $200,000. The very next year, because of gentrification, all of the homes in this neighborhood were selling at $800,000 or more. So I just couldn't continue, I couldn't afford to continue to do the work in this community. And so that's what brought me to Baltimore, because I had a couple of key learnings along the way. One is that across the country, we are in a housing crisis. There are just not enough homes for people, and it's actually not just a low income issue, it's not just a Black issue. Doctors, again, lawyers, folks who are, for all intents and purposes, higher income are having trouble finding housing. So this really is a crisis across the board. But 2, I realized that distressed neighborhoods like the ones that I grew up in actually had the most intrinsically valuable housing stock, even if it was the lowest market valued housing stock. So for me, I saw, okay, there's an information gap happening here that is a really great opportunity to make some change. And the third is that Black Americans like myself are oftentimes overlooked as a key targeted consumer base, yet we are representing one of the fastest growing economic groups across the country, and I felt that I could really tap into this growing group of Black folks who are really starting to just be at the cusp of readiness to build wealth. So I moved to Baltimore, the greatest city in America, to start Parity. And Parity's approach is that where there's kind of massive disinvestment and lack of political capital, lack of financial capital, what you do is you first build the social capital. So Parity creates upfront demand for interconnected people, so friends, moms and daughters, cousins, coworkers, congregation members, to say, hey, instead of going it alone and one of us moving on to an abandoned block, let's get 40 of our people and move on to an abandoned block together, because that immediately shifts the fabric and the risk profile of vacant and abandoned neighborhoods. And so what started from one has grown organically over time into, right now, we're a collective of about 40 individuals who are in the process of purchasing a Parity home. And in fact, we actually have a wait list of over 700 people who have reached out to buy a Parity home. So this indicates that there's not a lack of interest or demand for Baltimore, living opportunities in Baltimore. There is a systemic barrier that's preventing people from taking part in community. And so this is a picture we took about 2 years ago, so we need to update this, but we're folks who are about a third from the neighborhood. We're working in Harlem Park. They're about a third from Baltimore City, and then it's about a third of folks like myself who were pushed out of higher cost cities like New York or DC, who moved to Baltimore for more opportunity. And the thing about Parity, we're not just building homes, it's really about building community. So we wrap in a lot of social elements to our work. We have community gardens, we have events. Just the other day we had a Friendsgiving, which was like a precursor to Thanksgiving. So yeah, really excited about what we've created from a cultural perspective, but we also recognize that we have to prepare our home buyers to be mortgage ready. So we have partnerships with several key financial institutions that get our home buyers into mortgages. We run an 8-week curriculum so that we address things like credit, like what are points, what's an ARM, what's interest, what's variable, what's fixed. So our home buyers are highly educated in the mortgage process. And then we also teach them about things like maintaining your home, keeping your home long-term. What does maintenance look like on a home? So that's a little bit of the social aspect of how we go about building parity. I'm going to talk a little bit about the development approach. So Parity acquires vacant buildings by the block. So this was our first block. These were the properties that we owned. We actually subsequently acquired the one to the right. So right now we own about 40 properties in this one neighborhood. But this was, the early rendering. So before I even raised $1 of capital, this rendering cost $200. So MVPs, minimum viable products, don't have to be expensive. You don't need to build a whole house to demonstrate your vision. This was a simple rendering. Got this done in 2018. I've been using it ever since. So the vision really is to revitalize, not just rebuild the buildings, but revitalize the social fabric and bring people back to the community. Now, I want to ask a question. Between this photo and this photo, aside from just the buildings, what else do you see as a difference in people? Trees. Who said trees? Okay, trees. Flower boxes, exactly. These are some of the things that we don't think about, but trees, or the lack thereof, have massive health implications. And apologies if I'm preaching to the choir, but again, I was up at 5 a.m. Okay, I have to make this relevant to this audience. But okay, thank you. Thank you. But yeah, the trees, or lack thereof, make a huge difference. Shade. So there's a phenomenon called the heat island effect, where asphalt, concrete, and no trees amplifies heat. And so in poor neighborhoods, it's found that on average it can be about 8 degrees hotter than in more affluent neighborhoods with very robust tree canopy. So as we think about climate change, and also when we think about elders who are disproportionately, and the youth who are disproportionately exposed to heat, we have to think about trees. It also helps with stormwater runoff. Their roots help absorb rainfall. And again, when we think about climate change and more extreme weather events, trees are going to be incredibly important. They help filter particulates from the air. And then just for mental health, again, you don't realize it until you realize it, but just walking down a street that's tree lined and there's flower boxes, that does a lot for your mental health. But also vacant buildings have massive health implications. They release dust, they release particulates, they lead to lead and asbestos exposures, there's collapse risk, there's fire risk. I don't know if you all heard about the firefighters who perished in a vacant building fire in Baltimore, I think it was last year. It's a public safety issue. There's Jane Jacobs is a famous urban planner who said that having eyes on the street is the best deterrent against crime. Just meaning that when you have Miss James on her stoop, looking out her window, the old lady who knows everybody's business, that's actually a deterrent to crime. And then again, vacant buildings are a mental health issue. Research has found when you walk past a vacant building, your blood pressure spikes, your heart rate spikes, your stress level spike. And then lastly, vacant lots. Vacant lots attract vermin and they attract mosquitoes. They're terrible infestations on these vacant lots. And we know that vermin and mosquitoes are vectors for disease. Vacant lots attract dumping, which attract vermin and mosquitoes. And it also, again, impacts mental health. And again, with all of these things impacting mental health, think of the psyche of people who day to day have to live in vacant and distressed neighborhoods and how that trickles over into all of the other areas of your life. So these are the buildings that we started on. As they say, the roof was in the basement, totally collapsed. This is a picture from the rear of the building, so the front of the facade we had to stabilize so that it wouldn't collapse. And these were the trees, which are really just weeds that have grown into trees. They're dead. If you walked back here, within 10 minutes, you'd be covered head to toe in mosquitoes. So we cleared all the dead trees, cleared all the debris out of the buildings, and we pre-sold these first 2 houses in this state to our first 2 home buyers, Ico and Medina, who, despite what it looked like, could see the vision of where we were headed. And so with their buy-in, we were able to then go to a bank and say, hey, we actually, we have the home buyers, we have the exit, give us the money to do the renovations. So we built the houses meticulously, all new foundations, new framing, new mechanical, electrical, plumbing, new roof. And I'm really proud to say, June of this year, we had our ribbon cutting to celebrate the opening of their 2 homes. Thank you. So what started as this was the front of the buildings. Now it looks like this. We did historic renovations. These are not renderings, these are actual pictures. And yeah, just really beautifully built homes. Thank you. So here are some of the outcomes, aside from an HGTV home, is that they, on day one, have over $100,000 in equity. We sold those homes at $250,000. They appraised for $350,000. So $100,000 in equity. We did a historic tax credit, which is going to save them $80,000 in property taxes over 10 years. And that's a direct narrowing of the racial wealth disparity. But the softer things, or maybe the more important things, not only are they going to be able to pass these homes down to their children and their children's children, they have a built-in safety net with neighbors. Ico and Medina now, are very close friends. They have an increased sense of agency. So think about, going from feeling like things are happening to you or the world is happening to you to now you control your outcomes. And again, the generational wealth. And we've already started on the next 5 homes. These are the next homeowners in front of their vacant, currently vacant buildings, all on the same block. And for next year, we'll be scaling up to do 20 homes. So again, just in terms of the bottom line, conservatively, our estimation is that after about 30 years, so they're consistently paying their mortgage, they will have accumulated at least $400,000 in household wealth. That's assuming, modest appreciation. In reality, appreciation for these homes, could be enormous. So a couple of additional strategies for equity, because I know that you all are probably thinking it, you're probably going to ask it. How do we control against gentrification? Unfortunately, the market is going to do what the market is going to do, especially as we start to make the neighborhood occupied. But in our approach, having strategic control of most of the vacants is a tactic against gentrification, because when you control the vacants, you control the outcomes. So for parity, we currently own 40 vacant properties all in this community within a couple of blocks of each other. And we continue to do strategic acquisition. But one thing that I will say is that Baltimore City needs a land bank. We have essentially been doing our own land banking of properties as a small nonprofit, but really this should be a quasi-government agency that is tasked with acquiring each and every single vacant building. So Baltimore has 15,000 vacants and 23,000 vacant lots. The city housing department only owns 3,000 of those. The rest of them are privately owned, and oftentimes the owners have since deceased. So it's a massive issue, and we really need a dedicated public agency to be tackling this. But another equity approach. So for parity, we don't just focus on building the houses, we also focus on keeping legacy residents in their home. So in our neighborhood in particular, there are a lot of Black elders, mostly Black women, who are in their 80s, 90s, who own their homes free and clear, but oftentimes they fall behind on their property taxes. And so we raised a small fund of $150,000, and we bailed about 85 elders out of tax debt, which in Baltimore City, thank you. Thank you. I don't know if folks are familiar with the tax sale, but it's an incredibly predatory system where people who are behind on their tax debt, for as low as, in some cases, $700, that debt is sold oftentimes to like private equity funds on Wall Street, who then foreclose on the homes and kick people out of their homes. So we bail people out, and we're continuing to do this work. So my two co-founders, we started a separate organization, are John Kern and Nika Namdi, and then Jamar to the upper right is one of our home buyers. We were going door knocking August of 2020 to let people know, hey, your home is going into tax sale. And right then and there, after we took that picture, we decided to start an organization around this. So John and Nika now lead it full time. And we've been doing advocacy to end tax sale in its entirety. So I'm really proud to say we encouraged / forced the mayor to remove all owner occupants off of the tax sale list for the last 3 years. So thank you. Thank you. All right, so I'm wrapping up, and I still have some good time. So, but I'm not going to need all of it. So some key learnings is that there's so much narrative around Baltimore and all of its challenges, but my feeling is that but for the presence of vacants, Baltimore would be a healthy, thriving city, and we need to recognize that the vacants are a direct result and legacy of systemic racism. But when you solve the issue of vacants, you solve so many of the other issues that are plaguing Baltimore, whether it's public safety and crime, whether it's poor health outcomes, poor educational outcomes, poor environmental outcomes. Vacants are oftentimes at the crux of all of that. And that there is immense power and power in social capital. With parity, we couldn't raise money at first, but when we got just 40 people who said, I buy in, like I want to own a home here, suddenly that unlocked institutions that saw the power not only of Black neighborhoods, but of Black people. And even more important, Baltimore is rich in social capital. A lot of times we say Baltimore, Smaltimore, because we're all just like 1 or 2 degrees removed. So I just encourage all of us to lean into that innate social capital all around us. And the third is that I really do believe we can eliminate the issue of vacants in the next decade, but it'll be an all hands on deck effort, which is why I'm so thankful to Michelle for inviting me to speak in front of folks that I probably would not have otherwise had an opportunity to, because a room full of doctors and physicians and academics, you all can also help tackle this issue of vacancy. And so here are some ways that you all can get involved if you're feeling called to. You can volunteer. We hold several cleanups where we pick up trash. We do several tree plantings and flower plantings. If you want to get your hands dirty, we do some demolition, some light demolition year round. So for example, BGE will come out, or Care First came out and brought 30 or 40 employees to volunteer. You can also advocate. A lot of times, when I'm telling politicians or elected officials about we need the solution, they're like, yeah, okay. But when you have 100 doctors calling folks up saying, hey, we need this solution, then suddenly, the elected officials, they lean in a little bit more and, are maybe more willing to implement that solution. So if you are feeling called to get involved, I would love to talk to you more about some of the policy implementations that I see really working for Baltimore City, like a land bank. And lastly, this is a massive capital-intensive endeavor, renovating vacant buildings. We received $2 million from JP Chase in 2022, which allowed me to build a team and finish our first houses, thank you. But we're gonna need to continued investment. Care First and Kaiser Permanente, as well as LifeBridge Health, are some of our biggest funders. So if you represent a large institution that has a philanthropic portfolio, please make an introduction. And then there's also individual giving, but one thing around just the social capital, you might feel like you don't have a lot to give, but if you collect or if you mobilize 50 of your peers, suddenly that becomes like a transformative wave of capital that can really help transform these communities. So I'll end by saying that when we had that downward spiral. On the inverse, when you repair the social fabric first and build people power, that leads to an unlocking of investment and institutional capital and political capital that flows into communities. That allows us to repair the built environment. That in turn brings back population gain, helps with neighborhood healing, and it becomes a reinforcing upward spiral. So thank you all so much for your time.
Job, Bree. Thank you so much again. It's okay, and I'll step to the podium.
Thank you.
You know, when I first talked to Bree, before I reached out to her and I had read her story, I thought, remember that Michael Jackson song, The Man in the Mirror? So the woman in the mirror, if you want to make a change, look in the mirror, right? Make a change first with you. And I think that echoes what one of our speakers last night, Dr. Ansel, talked about in terms of what's it going to take to make a change, right? And I do think it's young leaders, getting them engaged and giving them platforms to demonstrate what can be done if you have the passion to make it happen. So that's what really inspired me from Bree's story, and I'm just so delighted that we were able to bring it to you. So we do have time to take a few questions, so please just come to the mic. But I'll get us started here with one question. I was so glad to hear you talk about the collaboration with the banks to support this effort. But I'm interested in, Baltimore had such a rich healthcare presence. And with the social determinants of health and healthcare organizations being required to do community assessments and to address the gaps, and of course housing. Without housing, you don't have an opportunity to have the best health outcomes, right? So I'm just wondering if there have been any conversations with the healthcare community in Baltimore, and if you could talk a bit about that, because we do have, in addition to physicians and other clinicians and academicians, we also have community engagement executives and administrators here from various hospitals and health systems.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned, Care First, which I think they're headquartered in Baltimore. Kaiser Permanente, that has a massive presence in West Baltimore, and then LifeBridge Health, which just bought the Bon Secours Hospital, also in West Baltimore, are all really thinking about how housing really plays a role in folks' health. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a graphic or a statistic that 20% of an individual's health, only 20% of it actually happens inside of a hospital, and the 80% happens in community, or it happens outside of the hospital. And so they're really thinking about how healthy homes lead to healthy households and healthy people, but also how healthy neighborhoods lead to healthy communities. And so, they've all made philanthropic investments into parity.
Yeah. And just to follow up on that just a bit in terms of scale, you've proven that this works whether you're in upstate New York or you're in Baltimore or somewhere in between. Do you envision eventually scaling this to share what the model is with others in other communities that are experiencing this high vacancy rate? Is that part of what you see for the future?
It is. We want to get Baltimore right. We probably still have another at least 2 or 3 years of just focusing on Baltimore, but this model works in places where there's hyper vacancy, whether it's Chicago or Detroit, St. Louis, Memphis, New Orleans. Like you said, some parts of upstate New York, like Buffalo, Newburgh. So A lot of folks have reached out asking how they can replicate the model. There's a couple of ways that we would approach that. One, we passed an appraisal gap bill that helps fund the creation of affordable homeownership opportunities that Governor Moore actually just signed into law earlier this year at about $10 million per year, which really needs an extra zero on that. So if you know Wes personally, please give him a call. But what we did was we created a toolkit around that piece of legislation that we share with other jurisdictions and other community advocacy groups so that they can lead that in their own neighborhoods. And we are slowly starting to think about how we can continue to support other groups leading renovation work.
I love that concept of toolkits that you can present to others. So we do have a couple of questions. It's mighty bright up here, but I think I see a couple of our colleagues, and we'll start over here, Adia, and then we'll come back to you.
This mic is very high. Good morning. I absolutely love Baltimore.
Yes.
I know Baltimore, and I'm so glad to see someone creating the change that Baltimore needs.
Thank you.
With that being said, thinking about healthcare and access, my mom is a patient at Hopkins. That's where she received her double lungs transplant surgery. That's part of why I know Baltimore so well. And as you mentioned, you go one block and everything is remodeled, beautiful. You would like to live there. Just 2 blocks down the street, everything is shut down. So thinking about healthcare and access for people, elderly, aging in place, that need to get access to the hospital, is your team working strategically when buying these properties as well, keeping in mind these medical centers? We also have University of Maryland Medical Center in Baltimore. How can this plan you're developing be strategic in areas that can help these low-income families and our elderly to get access, probably by public transportation, to get to these hospitals to get the care that they need?
It's a great question. So as a developer of buildings and homeownership, and even with the wraparound support that we provide to elder residents to stay in their homes, sometimes we recognize what our strengths are and what they aren't, and so we will never be a healthcare provider or even probably a connector. That's just not what we're set up to do. However, what we are starting to approach is looking at building really close relationships with other organizations that do specialize, whether it's in healthcare support or elder support. Right now we're doing a lot around the schools and looking at how we can lean in with the schools and forming partnerships with folks that do youth engagement. So we recognize where our strengths are, and for wherever they're not a strength, we look at partnerships. But I will say that what we've really been encouraging within our collective, so all of the people who are buying homes, is for them to form committees of things that they're really passionate about. So we have a school and education committee, but we also have an elder committee. And sometimes it's as simple as, for example, Baltimore City earlier this year had an instance where there was E. coli found in our water supply, and it impacted all of West Baltimore, and all of the water was turned off. Our home buyers mobilized amongst themselves to go out and buy cases of water, and then we went house to house, which was mostly elders, and gave them that water. So we do what we can in a small way, and then we partner with larger organizations that are better suited to tackling some of the issues that you just talked about.
Thank you. Hadia.
Hi, Hadia Green with Healthy Healing Community and part of the steering committee of Movement is Life. First of all, thank you for the work that you've done. And David Bramble, I'm sure you've crossed paths with, is a schoolmate of mine and definitely bigs you up. And so I've known of you before you came in front of us, so thank you. You actually brought tears to my eyes when you were talking, because I am from that same Harlem community, and I am one of the pushed out, despite whatever degrees I have. So your platform and the work that you do speaks true to me. What I wanted to know are two things. One, what is your background as far as did you have experience or education in real estate or business before you went into this? And then secondarily, one of the first homeowners that you showed, I guess the two homes that were adjacent to each other, I know you said you have a program now, the 8-week program to prepare people, but I'm wondering what the profile, like what are the income profiles, what does a person typically have to have set up to even become a potential for the homeowner of one of your projects?
Okay, what was the first question?
The first question is your background as far as whether or not you had real estate or business.
Okay, so no, I did not know a lick about real estate development, and I learned the hard way. So my background, I went to school at Northeastern University in Boston and studied international business and economics. So I did have a business background and then went on to work in Wall Street, so I kind of formulated a finance background. But I didn't know anything about real estate development. I think the only thing that helped me from my education is I'm pretty good with a spreadsheet, and you need to like model your pro formas and all of that. But that first house that I did that had the video, that's why I really actually did the work, because I knew I was gonna have to learn by doing. I didn't want to be in a position where I was relying entirely on a GC or a general contractor to do the work. I don't know if anyone has ever tried to renovate a bathroom or a kitchen. It is the most painful thing you'll ever do in your life, let alone try to renovate a dilapidated building. So I just learned by doing and being really hands-on and involved. And then in terms of the profile, we are actually really diverse. Even within our Blackness, it's incredibly diverse. So we really value and prioritize a mixed income community. So we have folks who are making as much as $40,000 all the way up to like $95,000. We have folks who are RNs and work for the city, all the way to people who are entrepreneurs, artists, software engineers. One of our home buyers works for Hopkins in higher education. So then we have like young professional or singles, we have married couples, we have some households with children, no children. We have multi-generational households where some of our home buyers are bringing in their elderly parents so that they can cohabitate. So it really runs the gamut. And while we don't exclude anyone on the premise of race, we do center Black outcomes and Black wealth, but we actually have one white home buyer. So we're kind of like a really interesting group. There's not one profile per se, but I will say what we all have in common is that we are willing to basically use our economic power to kind of back up our values and our value systems and what we hold important.
Thank you. Yeah, I just asked that because it's hard to buy a home if you don't have a down payment. And if your income is $40,000 a year, it's hard to build that.
It is. So one thing that we do around that is, one, in the curriculum, we help folks save, but we also, Parity puts a $60,000 down payment assistance towards each and every house.
Wow.
Yeah. So many times our home buyers are coming to the table with no closing costs and no out-of-pocket, because we recognize that oftentimes for Black households, they don't have like the friends and family that they can go to, the uncle that can just wire them $5,000 or $10,000. So, yeah.
Thank you, Hadia. Dr. Huff.
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. As somebody who has done some renovations and has rental property, I understand the 110%, the hard work. The question I have for you is, I love this model in like a urban setting, but I'm from the South originally. I've worked in mostly rural areas, and we have the same problems in smaller communities where we have that level of blight, where we have that level of vacancy. But you may not have as many resources from a banking standpoint. There may only be one hospital in the entire community if you're lucky. Do you have any thoughts on using this model in a smaller area, in like rural areas, whether it's in the South, whether it's in the Midwest, but more in smaller areas, smaller populations?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm gonna be honest in saying, like, I don't know what I don't know. I'm not super familiar with the market, like, economics of rural communities, but from what you have described, I think just the basic principles of real estate is that you have to have some form of an engine or some form of a reason for people to populate an area. And that could be an economic engine, like an employment center, like a big hospital or like a big university or some kind of industry. But it could also be a cultural engine. It can be that that area is renowned for its arts. It can be that that area is renowned for its eco-tourism, whatever it may be. So I guess I would encourage, where you feel like there are not institutions, think about the other assets that region or rural area brings, that is then the magnet for people to come back. And if you can get the social capital, again, of people who would say, even if it's 100 folks that would say, hey, like, if we received a massive influx of investment, I would live here, I would patron this business, that can sometimes tee up the conversation with like larger, more nationwide banks or financial institutions to make the case to invest in your rural community. And then I will say, if there aren't big banks, and really big banks are not real community like leaders, sorry, but there are CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions. They are often funded by the banks, but they have a more social impact directive, and they're oftentimes more willing to have those conversations around funding, like rural communities. So Enterprise is a big one. LISC, L-I-S-C, is another. What is it called? I'm blanking on the other name, but I'll think about it and I'll get back to you on that.
I'm afraid that's all the time that we have, so thank you very, very much for your questions. And thanks again to Bree.
Thank you.